Starting a company is probably the hardest thing most people do in their entire lives. You talk to entrepreneurs and they talk about, I was at the highest of highs, at noon, and then by 5 o'clock, I thought I was going to go out of business. It is not for the faint of heart.
What do you think defines a good startup community ecosystem?
To find other people who can, A, not only fill in your gaps, but also B, be a cheerleader for you. We have been wooed by this myth of Silicon Valley that everybody's got to go raise money. And yet every time you do that, you're giving away a slice of the company. If you can bootstrap it, that is almost always the best way to go.
Welcome to another episode of Founders Growth. My name is John Hill, aka Small Mountain, and today I'm joined by Cameron Cushman. Cameron is the founder of Red Sage Innovations, and he has been the longtime community organizer of 1 Million Cups here in my hometown of Fort Worth. And so we're going to be talking to him about his path of being a founder, also a lot about 1 Million Cups because it's a very cool organization for entrepreneurs and founders, and it really helps bring community and awareness around small business and entrepreneurship. Very excited to have you on the show, Cameron. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing with Red Sage and kind of how it's going so far?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here with you today. Yes, so I started Red Sage Innovation back in May of 2025, and it was essentially my private consulting effort to continue the work that I've been doing to build the entrepreneurial community in Fort Worth or wherever clients may need my services. I have this really weird and unique background that has enabled me to build entrepreneurial communities, not only in the United States, but literally across the world. And so I've got this kind of very unique training that I want to put into practice to help more people innovate, help more people become entrepreneurs, take technologies to market. And so that includes working with universities, economic development organizations, and the community, because there's so many great resources in the community of any stripe, that of any size, that most people just don't realize exist. And, we're kind of moving out of this very top-down world, and where the hierarchy was so important. It's who works for who and how do you move up the chain and all that kind of stuff, to a world of more connected networks. And the connected networks are so important these days. And I want to make sure that I can help connect people into the right network to get them the right connection, the right resource, the right educational opportunity that they need at the right time in their business. As they move their innovation to market or their idea to market, I want to be that kind of connecting piece between different entities, different people, different ideas, so that we can maximize our chances for success and your chances for success as a university, as a startup, as a researcher, whatever that may look like.
I love that. I've lived in Fort Worth my entire life, and until I went into super small business with a business partner, I had no real appreciation for the small business community, the entrepreneurial community that was here, and so my business partner had been on the path for, a great deal longer than I had. And so he was talking about going out and networking, and I didn't even know what that meant, and he talked about that, there was a pretty great ecosystem here in Fort Worth, right? And this was back in 2000, I think, 12, right? So, a long time ago. And sure enough, right, when you go looking for it, you can find it, and it's very cool. Everybody that I know who's been around networking and small business has got some experience with 1 Million Cups. And it's so awesome because, to your point, community is so important when you're going out on your own, right? It's super easy to over-isolate yourself. It's super easy to think that no one gets it and that no one's going to understand you. And we're just going to go build in secret and come back and unveil everything when it's all big and huge and cool and flashy and everything. And most of those people spend more time languishing, right, and struggling than they do actually making forward progress. I love that. And I love the idea of trying to take that further, right? And really kind of pushing that idea because, there's a lot of digital communities now, and that's really great, but it's, finding your people is really, that was a game changer for me and everybody I know here locally that has had some success. It all comes from finding that right kind of community. And, kind of jumping into that a little bit, what do you think really kind of defines a good kind of startup community ecosystem? What are the most important kind of pillars of that, right? If people are going to go out looking for it.
Well, the first one is it's just an overarching recognition that starting a company is probably the hardest thing most people do in their entire lives. It is not easy to go out on your own. And even if you have all the expertise in the world in your particular issue or you have all the drive and all the gumption to open that restaurant or solve that problem or take that research to market, you're still going to have gaps. You're still going to have the roller coaster of every startup company ever.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to figure out how to smooth out those bumps, how to get through the tough times. You talk to entrepreneurs and they talk about, I was at the highest of highs, at noon, and then by 5 o'clock, I thought I was going to go out of business. And sometimes that's like an everyday or every week occurrence. It is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
And so to find other people who can, not only fill in your gaps because nobody's good at everything, but also be a cheerleader for you. I think that's so important in an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And even if they're not the ones that can help write that check or to be the co-founder or to be your first customer or whatever it is that you need at that particular juncture, and you probably need all of those at some point, you are still, they can still help you, right? And I think it's that willingness to help. And this is where I have a little bit of like a love-hate relationship with Fort Worth in this, because it's such a helpful community. People show up and they want to help you. And yet we are missing some of the big fundamental pieces, particularly around funding ecosystem building, that I think Fort Worth really, really lacks compared to other cities of our size or other cities that just kind of developed in a different way and came up in a different way, not necessarily related to population size, just how their city and how their community developed. And so to be able to access that network and fill in your gaps and find those people, you mentioned it, starting a company is also really lonely. And if you can find other people who are in the same boat with you, that can be so valuable to just let you know you're not crazy, to let you know you're normal, and to have people that are cheering you on along the way, that, I'm not the only one that's having this particular struggle right now. I just met a guy or a gal who's struggling with the exact same thing, and I don't feel so crazy anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I I don't feel so crazy anymore. I'm not the only
Right.
person going through these struggles. Like
Right.
that's such a big part of the journey, because it's super easy to get, one of my favorite lines is founder's vision is always a little dirty, right? The lane's too wide. We all think we're super special and no one else has ever done anything like this and stuff like this. And no one else is going to get it. And it's not helpful, at all. So one of the things that I think is really cool about 1 Million Cups specifically, right, is that it's not just uh, like a philosophical conversation, right? It starts with a pitch, and so you have to get up in front of a group of people and you kind of have to like pitch your idea, your startup, like you would be going out for investors, right? And being a guy who's really focused on helping people find great ways to practice for their sales conversations, that really floored me, that it was so focused around that. And there's a lot of very like hard rules around like how you you know how you pitch into that situation. Can you give a quick rundown of what those kind of boundaries are, so that way anyone who might be thinking about trying out 1 Million Cups can kind of have an inside lane?
Yes, and the first thing I'll start with is we got to get the language right here. It is not a pitch at 1 million cups, because that indicates you're presenting for money. You're trying to go on Shark Tank. You are trying to get something out of it, right? Now, of course, you get lots of things out of a presentation, but we use the word presentation because A, we don't want the SEC to show up and say that we're like pitching to a room full of non-accredited investors.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
B, as far as the Kauffman Foundation goes, it's an educational program. You are presenting your business, but you're also learning. And not just the presenter or the person asking the question, but I've been going to 1 Million Cups for, 12, 13 years now. I've never been to one where I didn't learn something, because you're learning about an industry that you didn't know about. You're learning about a problem in the world that you didn't know existed. You're seeing a new solution. And even when it's like, the most recent ones these days have been a lot about AI, of course, and a lot about mental health. And those are important things, but still everybody comes at it from a little bit of a different way. So as far as what goes into a good presentation, we typically in Fort Worth have 2 startups every week. They get 6 minutes to present, and there's no magic to the 6 minutes. That's just kind of where we felt like it worked really well. 5 felt a little too short. 7 to 8 to 10 felt a little too long. So we ended up at about 6 minutes. And then you take 20 minutes of Q&A from essentially a live studio audience. And it's whoever shows up from your community. And you never know who that's going to be. It might be that investor that you're looking for. It might be that co-founder. Or it might just be a group of people who are interested to hear what you're working on. And they can help just as much as the person with the deep pockets or the deep technological expertise. So first off, I'd say, you got to make sure that everybody understands what it is you're doing. Just use simple terms. Sometimes these these tech nerds or these researchers, these scientists, they get up there and they use all the jargon. It's like, no,
Mm,
you've got to dumb it down so that I can understand it. And I'm not a very smart individual myself, and so if I can understand it, then I think you're probably doing okay. But just
yeah.
keep in mind those jargon terms. Every industry has them. Every technology has them. You can use those. You just make sure that you define them. The second thing is make sure that you work on the problem. Tell me what the problem is. Too
Mm,
many entrepreneurs, they jump in and my solution is this, my solution is this. Great, but fall in love with the problem and describe the problem to me first and make sure you understand the problem really, really well that you're solving before you tell me what your solution is.
hmm,
Third thing is, I can't tell you how many people get up there and they present and they just forget to tell us how they're going to make money.
mhm,
And if you're a nonprofit, that's one thing. Nonprofits can still make money and they probably should think about some sort of a revenue stream in some form or fashion. But people will finish their whole presentation and not tell me how they're going to make money. Now, in certain industries, that's kind of obvious, right? If I'm opening a restaurant, I'm going to serve some sort of food or beverage to you and you're going to pay me money for it. But in other places, it's really hard to figure out how the company's actually going to make money. And that can be a huge miss if the companies don't at least describe that part of it.
interesting.
Um, I would also say the next thing is, why are you the person to solve this problem? We talk a lot in startup culture about that like unfair advantage. I
Mm,
worked at Apple, so I understand everything there is to know about the iPhone. Okay, that's a really cool unfair advantage. And it doesn't have to be slick and cool like that. It could be my dad owned a restaurant and I know everything there is to know about how to run a Mexican food restaurant or whatever it is you're trying to do.
mhm,
What is your unfair advantage? And how are you going to leverage that into what it is that you want to start? So those are just some kind of basic tips that I see over and over again.
hmm,
Make sure you tell me what you're doing and use layman's terms so I can understand it. And if you want to use jargon, fine. Just make sure you define those terms.
yeah.
2, be sure and tell me your problem. What are you actually solving? 3, tell me how you're going to make money or at least provide for the business. And then 4, what is your unfair advantage?
I love that. And I'm just kind of like thinking about, the time and everything. How many people push back around the idea that it needs to be 6 minutes? Like, do you get a lot of, well, we can't possibly shoehorn all of our value into like a 6 minute. Like, do you get a lot of pushback, or do people get excited about the opportunity of this and they're willing to kind of go and try to figure it out?
Yeah, I don't have much sympathy for that because the point of the exercise is to fit it into 6 minutes.
Hmm.
You can talk about your business probably for hours. Nobody wants to hear you talk
Yeah.
about it for an hour. But it's also this is not an elevator pitch situation where you only have 90 seconds or whatever to tell
Hmm.
the guy you're on the elevator with what you're working on. So part of this is you have to talk about it in an efficient kind of way. You can only use so many slides. You can only describe the problem in so much detail. You have to figure out what's important. And so I really I think that's a huge part of the exercise is getting it down to those bite-sized chunks, not going too deep on any one thing and yet covering the waterfront. The
Hmm.
other thing you can do is save some for the Q&A, right? So let's say I can only fit 10 slides into my 6-minute presentation. But you
Hmm.
know what? I'm going to have slide 11, 12, 13, 14 just in case I get a question about it, right? Or do like a politician does and say, that's a great question, but here's what I'd also like to address. Use your liberty and your time in the Q&A to bring up some things that maybe you didn't have time for. The other
Hmm.
thing too that kind of evolved over time in 1 Million Cups is the last question we always ask is what can we, the 1 Million Cups community insert your city name here, what
Hmm.
can we in Fort Worth do to help you in your startup? And so you can already bake that question in and know that question is coming. So again, that gives you a little bit of extra time at the end of the Q&A to say, here's what I really need. I really need an investment. I really need a co-founder. I really need a space. I really need a customer.
Hmm.
So you can leverage the Q&A time to help you with something that you don't get into that initial 6-minute presentation.
That's awesome. I love the idea about, using the time well, also being prepared, but I love the idea of like, okay, how can we help you? Um, as a kind of a general question, and not to put you on the spot, how many 1 million cups communities are there here in the United States?
So it varies. It's all volunteer driven. So it's a little hard to, there's not a payroll for this because we're all volunteers,
Yeah.
except for a few staff in Kansas City at the Kauffman Foundation where it started in 2013.
Okay.
Um, or 2012. Yeah, 2012. Sorry. There's over 100 in the United States. I can confidently
Oh,
say
wow.
that.
Okay.
It has also gone international. The concept kind of caught on and has gone international. They had to change the branding, so it's called Startup Huddle internationally, but the idea is the same, the concept's the same, and it's run through a different organization. But it's in about 60 international cities,
Mm.
and they're literally all over the world. And it's been really fun to see this thing grow. Here locally, if your audience is local, there's one in Arlington, there's one in North Richland Hills, there's one in Dallas, there's one in Frisco, there's
Oh.
one in Plano. And so I tell people to use that as a go-to-market strategy. And we've had
Mm.
companies that have literally used 1 million cups as a ready-made audience to introduce themselves to the community, their idea to the community, their company to the community. There's one guy, I think he holds the record that he's presented in like 62 different cities. Now, some of those are virtual,
Yeah.
but a lot of those he's been to in person. I was on with a gal just a week or two ago. She's been to like 42 cities. And the way she
Holy
does it is
smokes.
she just sort of figures out, hey, I'm going to be in Dallas, Fort Worth for a conference. Well, I'm going to
Mhm.
go and make sure that I go a little bit early or I stay a day late. And I'm going to make sure I hit a 1 million cups while I'm there. I'm going to apply a few months in advance. This is the date. This is the only date I'm going to be there. So you can kind of take it or leave it. But I love that because they get the opportunity to get in front of an audience of, it may only be 10, 12 people, but it might be 40 or 50 people on that particular
Yeah.
day that would never have heard about their product or their service had they not shown up at a 1 million cups. And then you
Hmm.
never know where it leads, Hey, do you have lunch plans? I'd really like for you to meet so-and-so. He would love your idea. He would love to
Yeah.
write you a check. Can you stick around or can we schedule a follow-up call? And so I always tell people like, go to one and see if you like it. If you do
Mhm.
like it, go present. It's always free to present, free to attend. And then if you find value in that, then go apply for the rest of them in your neighborhood, in your region, or if you're on the road a lot, wherever they are, wherever you're going to be, see if there's a 1 million cups and use that to your advantage.
That's a huge nugget, Cam. Like the fact that it is so prevalent, there are so many of them, and it's kind of an open call, right? Because, if you're doing something like this, there is always a need to have like solid people to come in and present and everything. But the fact that it's open, like it's literally, your game to lose or not try at. That's fascinating. That's
Well,
like in the 40 people, like can you imagine how tight that person is at like talking about what they're doing? Like I mean, it's very easy to get a little nervous and overtalk the point or not remember all your talking points and everything. But like after 40, I would imagine that person has got it very much dialed in. That is awesome. Holy smokes. I like now like I kind of want to go do some traveling and stuff like
there
that
you
and go check
go.
out some of the other ones. That is cool.
Yeah, and
Um,
it always kind of it frustrates me, but I just don't understand the psychology of it. There's a whole school of people too who are like, "Oh, I'm too nervous to get in front of people. I don't want to present."
mm,
Okay,
yeah,
then you're not serious because you should be wanting to talk about your business at every chance you get. Now,
absolutely.
especially if it's free and it's people who are going to be friendly.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention is, we all love Shark Tank, and the point of Shark Tank is that the sharks create the drama by tearing into the startup or like
Hmm.
picking apart their business idea. Well, at 1 million cups, we say it's like Shark Tank except it's friendly, so we
Mm,
call it a dolphin tank because
mm,
everybody wants to swim with dolphins. Not everybody wants to swim with sharks.
I
And so
love that.
there's really no downside to you presenting. And
Hmm.
yet people get so nervous. Oh, I could never do that. I don't know. I don't know how to use PowerPoint. I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't even have to have PowerPoint. Just come tell me what you're working on. Give me
Yeah.
your flyer, whatever. It doesn't matter. But I grew up, they've kind of changed this saying, but my dad always used to say practice makes perfect, right? And
Hmm.
the more you practice, the better off your pitch is going to be every time. And this is the
Yeah.
beauty of a 1 million cups presentation is somebody in the back room will say, and hopefully they do it respectfully in a dolphin tank kind of way,
Hmm.
but they'll say something like, I didn't understand slide 7. Can you help me understand that? Or can you define that term again? Well, if you're a cognizant entrepreneur and you're trying to maximize that interaction, you're telling yourself, okay, what did that individual not understand about slide 7? How can
Yeah.
I make that better for the next presentation? How can I not get that question again because I've explained it better, or the slide looks better, or the chart is easier to read, or whatever it is?
Mm,
So the more you get in front of an audience, the more of that feedback that you get. And you're right, the better off you're going to be. Hopefully you're improving every time you present, every
hmm.
time you talk about your company, every time you take that Q&A, you're getting better and better. And there's one other thing that I think is super important to this is 1 million cups is a great place to go in and make your mistakes. This is where you're going to
Oh,
trip coming out of the blocks,
yeah.
because we're going to be a friendly community and there's no investment on it, on the line. There's no potential future sale on the line. It's just a chance to practice in front of a friendly group of people. And if you totally screw it up, and boy, I've seen some people absolutely get cold feet and screw it up, that's great, because you've gotten that one out of the way. I'd
Yeah.
much rather you do that in front of a 1 million cups group of supportive folks than in a venture capitalist office or a banker's office
Yeah.
or the CEO of X company that would be your ideal target customer. You want to get those reps in so that you can be really prepared for those kind of meetings when they come in the future of your business.
Absolutely. Kind of backing up a little bit, right? Because I know in your past role, right? Because you were talking about that you think that one of the things that Fort Worth is missing is, funding and stuff like this. But we also have a community here in Fort Worth called Cowtown Angels, right? That does, some investments and different things like that. And you were on top of that in your old role and everything. If a founder is thinking about bootstrapping or doing their own thing versus going down the road of investment, what do they need to be thinking about? Like, what do they need to keep top of mind, and how does that influence their decision one way or the other?
Great question. And I think, I just want to dispel a myth right off the bat. Very few startups actually go raise that kind of capital, either angel
Mm,
capital or venture capital. We have been wooed by this myth of Silicon Valley that everybody's got to go raise money. And if you don't raise venture capital money, you suck and you're never going to go anywhere. And yet every time you do that, you're giving away a slice of the company, either in an equity stake or you're taking on debt. You're changing the profile of the company,
mhm,
and you're giving up less ownership potentially for yourself. So if you can bootstrap it, which, just to define a term here, bootstrapping is where you don't take any outside investment. You just cash flow it. You just use the money that you make to continue growing your business.
yeah,
If you can bootstrap it, that is almost always the best way to go.
yeah,
However, if you're in certain industries like tech, where anybody can copy you, but you just got to be first to market, you got to be first to get 1 million users or whatever your target is.
mhm,
Yeah, you're going to need to dump a bunch of money into marketing or product development or whatever it is. You're going to need that outside capital because it's a race. The other industry I would say that requires a lot of outside capital is anything involving biotech, particularly around pharma. If you're
mhm,
talking about FDA approval or it's a medical device and you've got to test it on humans before you can sell it,
mm, yeah,
that requires a lot of money and a lot of time. It's 10 years before a drug will hit the market. And
mhm,
that's a good thing, right? We want to make sure that it's safe, but boy, it sure does cost a whole lot of money to get those clinical trials going or whatever testing you've got to do to make sure that it's safe.
mm,
And so if you fall into one of those categories, you may have to raise money. There may be the only way that you can do it. But then there's also a lot of other ways you can do it. There's SBA loans. Look at a 7A loan from the SBA. Banks typically love to loan to small businesses, and especially the right kind of small businesses, those that you can collateralize, like a restaurant or a retail shop or a product. You can walk in with, I have an order for 1,000 of my widgets. Well, they'll loan you money on that sometimes.
mhm,
You haven't even made them yet. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can finance your company, but bootstrapping is typically the best way to do it. You asked specifically about Cowtown Angels. Yes, we have several angel groups in town, and throughout the country too. And some companies make a point of going to raise angel capital. It tends to be pretty early stage, and they call them angels, but they're typically just retired people or people that have made a decent amount of money and want to invest in startup companies. Now it's highly risky,
mhm,
but the hope is that they get really good returns out of it. And so typically, sometimes you'll go present to an angel group. They tend to meet in groups of 20, 30, 50, depending on how big the group is. And they find strength and de-risking in having multiple people in the room hearing the same pitches. Now, in this case, it really is a pitch because you're actually pitching for investment.
yeah,
And a lot of times they'll come in. You might find one angel that really likes your deal, and he'll say, yes, I'll write you $100,000 check or $200,000 checks.
mhm,
What typically happens, though, is it's 10 guys or girls writing $10,000 checks to get to that $100,000 investment. So it spreads
interesting,
the risk around. But it also puts more people on your cap table, your capitalization table, which is who owns your business.
Yeah.
You also have more investors you have to deal with in case you get to a point where you're like, should I sell the company or should I not sell the company? Should I go through path A or go down path B? You
Mm-hmm.
have to ask your shareholders. And so at that point, it does get a little bit more complicated. So as long as you kind of understand some of those basics, I think angel capital can be a great way to go for those right kind of businesses. And if you think that's what you need. The
Interesting.
other the other question you have to ask yourself is, what am I going to actually spend that money on? Because
Mm.
people say, oh, I need to raise $1 million. Okay, what for? What do you need $1 million for? Well, I have to
Yeah.
buy this machine. Okay, well, if you got to buy like a thing that's going to help you, great. But is there a way you could rent that machine? Is there a way you could use some extra time, like after hours, in a lab or at a factory or whatever it is that you need? There's other
Mm-hmm.
questions you got to ask yourself. The other thing that drives me bonkers too is when people, they sort of wake up with this idea, oh my gosh, I got the best idea for a company. I got to go raise $1 million. I got to go hit the venture investors. No, you don't. You got about 17 steps you probably need to take before you get to that point.
Mm.
You got to validate the concept. You got to prove it'll work. You got to find some initial customers. You got to do a whole bunch of things before you even really need that venture money.
Yeah.
And then once you decide you do need it, then you got to figure out what you're actually going to spend it on.
Yeah, I think, man, I'm thinking back to before I really worked in this space, and I had such weird views on what entrepreneurship was and the idea of getting investors and things like this. But that idea that it's probably not going to be one person writing a check for $100,000. It's going to be a bunch of people like writing $10,000 checks. Like that has the potential to put like a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Like just hearing that makes me a little nervous, right? As far as like managing all those relationships and like, making sure that everyone's aligned with the right kind of vision and stuff like that. So very,
Well,
very interesting.
and it works both ways because you may want those people on your cap table, right? So
Mm,
go back to Shark Tank, right? People want to do a deal with Mark Cuban because they know he's a really successful businessman.
yeah.
They want to do a deal with Mr. Wonderful because he's really good at specific industry segments. You
Hmm.
want someone like that because they can help open doors for you that you could probably never open for yourself. But then you have Mr. Wonderful breathing down your neck. You have Mark
Mm,
Cuban calling and
hmm.
saying, hey, buddy, I saw last week that you didn't grow as fast as you did. A, you need to do better, or B, how can I help, or whatever that looks like, whatever that
Yeah.
conversation looks like. And so it's a two-way street, and you just got to understand what it is that you're actually getting into before you jump in and start taking other people's money.
One thing that I've heard from someone, I was networking and I met a guy who'd done the venture thing, right? And he'd put himself out there as a venture capitalist after he'd grown a thing and sold it and stuff like this. And he was talking about that most people don't really have the mindset, right? Because it is a big gamble, to your point that you said a second ago, right? Um, and so people love the idea of growth on their money and stuff like that. But timeline, it always takes, twice as long as we're planning for, and, all these other mantras that are very, popular in our space. Um, if, what should someone be thinking about when they're going down that path, right? Like, how do they avoid, like the short time thinkers, the people who aren't really, able to handle that risk? Like how can they, make sure that they're partnering with the right people?
Yeah, great question. So I'll sort of start at the top and then end up at the bottom, so to
Okay.
speak. There's a Harvard professor named Noam Wasserman who wrote a book called Founder's Dilemma. This is
Mm,
probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And he'd interviewed a bunch of founders and like, here's what happened, right? And he boiled it down to a bunch of different things. But um, one of the ways I heard him present one time, and I think it's so valuable, is he said, if you're going to go down this high growth, venture backed kind of path, he said, you have to decide at some point, and it's probably not initially, but it's a good question to ask yourself. It's like, do I want to be rich or do I want to be king?
mm,
And it is very rare that you can be both. Now, Mark Zuckerberg is probably both. Elon Musk is probably both. But
mhm,
it's very rare that you can do both because there will be a time where you have to make really tough decisions that could include you stepping away from the company, you selling the company because you want to be rich. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's capitalism as a whole. If you can grow something that has value and solves a real problem, go for it. Make money on it. You absolutely should. That's why we do
mhm,
this, right? Or you can be king. You can have all the power. I'm never going to step down as the CEO. I'm never going to make those tough decisions to maximize shareholder value or however you want to say it. I want the power. And I think
mm,
you have to decide fairly early on, do I want to be rich or do I want to be king?
I
Let's take it
love
all the way
that
back.
distinction.
Well, let's take it all the way back to the beginning. There is one of my favorite people in the entrepreneurial community is a guy named Gary Shoniger, and he has boiled this down to this mindset of what it's like to be an entrepreneur, what it takes to be an entrepreneur, how to think like an entrepreneur. And he's written several books on the subject. I'd highly recommend both of them. And it's not necessarily about, do I want to be rich or do I want to be king? It's not necessarily about, do I need to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or anything like that. His point is just go into the world thinking like an entrepreneur, which is, what are the problems that I see in my everyday life that I might be able to solve? And he even takes it down to like, how are you raising your children, right? What's the conversation around the dinner table? Hey, kids, did anyone see a problem in the world today that bothered them or that they think they could solve in a unique way? It's literally that easy to begin to think like an entrepreneur. And Gary has tons of different examples of somebody who was the least entrepreneurial person you could probably imagine. One story he likes to tell is about a sanitation worker. I think he was in Albuquerque, low-level guy driving a trash truck or whatever it was that he did. Worked for the city, Cities are not known for being very entrepreneurial. And he has an idea that he thinks could actually save the city some money on a specific process in the sanitation world. Presents it to his boss after he takes some of this entrepreneurial mindset education, and turns out his boss really likes it. And they implement it, and it saves the city like millions of dollars. And it was all just because this guy saw a problem. He began to think about a solution that could help not only him, but also everybody in the city, his boss, the sanitation department, the environment, you name it. And he had the gumption and the bravery to sort of put it forward, and it turned into a real thing. And so it doesn't have to be these grand visions. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to solve climate change or I'm going to become the next Facebook. You opening a restaurant that serves a new kind of food that employs 10 people is hugely valuable for your community. But someone has to take that risk. Someone has to think like an entrepreneur. Someone has to develop that mindset. And it may not be you. You may have the idea, but the person who could actually become the entrepreneur. And maybe that's how you exercise that muscle, is by sharing that idea with someone that you think could take it to market, not necessarily doing it yourself. Not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. It's very hard. As I said a couple of minutes ago, it's probably the hardest thing most people do in their entire lives.
Yeah, for sure. Man, so much value just like in the first couple of minutes of this thing, right? About just like trying to make sure that like you're working with the end in mind, right? Like, a mentor said that line to me, and I kind of think about it all the time, Now, after all this time, right, of being around 1 Million Cups, being around, the angel groups and being around all these entrepreneurs and everything, one of the things we were talking about before we hit record was just still the difficulty of going out on your own, right? It's always it's easier to help other people than it is to like, help yourself and stuff like that. So going out on your own as a founder, right? What have been the struggles for you, the hard parts for you, anything come to mind as like, I was really not expecting to struggle with this?
Yeah. So I have recently jumped in to the pool with both feet, starting my own company. And I had a former boss who liked to say, it's like eating your own dog food, right? It's like I'm eating my own dog food on a daily basis. And there are parts of what I'm doing now at Red Sage Innovation that I kind of know what to do. I know where to find the people that I want to target. I don't always have the right messaging, but I'm working on that. The words come pretty easily to me. But like anybody else in the world, there are parts that I know I'm not good at. And I hope I'm self-aware to know those. I think I do after doing this kind of work for a long time. I'll give you 2 quick examples. One is, how to kind of track everything on the back end, your expenses, your mileage, your driving. I drive to a lot of meetings and I should be getting credit for that. The federal government says that I get to get credit for that as a small business owner. Well, I wasn't sure how to do that. I wasn't sure which technology I should use. I'm terrible at spreadsheets. So I was like, I'm not going to do this on my own. So I put it out on my LinkedIn and I just said, hey, entrepreneurial community, I don't care who, how do you track your mileage? Because I'm not good at this. I've never done this before. How do I track my mileage so I can, make sure I'm getting every dollar back from the federal government that they want me to have, right? I'm not like trying to cheat the government here.
Yeah.
They have told me I can do this. So within a few minutes, I get 15 responses. I like this platform. I like this platform. I looked at them and it was like maybe 8 people recommended the same one. A couple people recommended a different one. I was like, great, that's all I needed. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Downloaded it on my phone. It has been an absolute game changer, and it shows you exactly how much money you're saving every time you take a drive. And you can classify it as personal because I took my kid to school, or you're doing it as business. And so it was just like a really easy, simple way that I was able to leverage the community to solve a real problem that I had.
That is cool. Can you share which solution you ended up working with?
Yeah, it's called Mile IQ.
I use the same one.
I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Game changer.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And it kind of automatically does it in the background as long as you sit there every few days and kind of tell it, no, that was personal. Yep, that's business. It really adds up.
Yeah.
And it's just a little thing that can become a big thing. And if you're not taking advantage of it, shame on you.
Absolutely.
And B, let the technology do the work for you. You're a busy entrepreneur. You got 1,000 other things you're worried about. So let the technology work for you. The second thing I would say, as far as eating your own dog food, is I'm not good at the financial piece. How do I make sure I'm paying my taxes? How do I make sure I'm tracking these expenses the right way? How do I pay subcontractors? These are like silly little things that can have a huge impact and frankly can get you in a whole lot of trouble if you aren't good at it, right?
Yeah.
So I had a call just this week actually with the gal that had done my taxes in the past. And I was just asking her very basic questions. How should I think about this? Oh, you can do this. You can do that. I would think of it like this. And it was hugely beneficial to me because that's not my expertise. I don't like doing that kind of stuff, but I know it's an important part of the business. And so you have to kind of delve into what you're not good at. So A, being self-aware to know that you're not good at it.
Yeah.
B, finding someone who is good at it that can help you with it. And then C, knowing where you need to pay for services versus doing it yourself. And so in this case, she's an expert at this. I'm more than happy to pay her and write her a check to A, keep me out of jail, B, keep me from getting those terrible letters from the IRS, and C, just giving me the peace of mind to know that I'm legal and that I'm doing things in the right way, because this is not my strength. If you flip it around, she would probably say, well, I'm not good at PowerPoint presentations. Good. That's something I'm good at, right? I'm not good at doing a podcast. Great. I'm good at doing a podcast. I could help you with that. And so that's what I love too about this community of entrepreneurs is it's always a way that we can try to kind of help each other. The Mile IQ example, right? People jumped right in. This is the one I like. I tried 5 of them. This is the one I like. It was so valuable for me and so helpful.
Yeah. I love that. How do you get better at isolating the things that you should be offloading, delegating versus the things that you should be trying to figure out a working, knowledge so that way you can do it yourself? How does that work for Cam specifically?
That is a great question. I don't know that I have mastered that yet. Same,
honestly, right?
Yeah, and it is a daily struggle because there are times where I just love talking to people and helping people, and 90% of the time that doesn't give me any benefit. That doesn't pay me, right? But I like doing it. Going back to the previous example, there's a big writing project that I'm working on that we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
And I found myself, instead of working on the writing project, words are my jam. I was excited to work on the project, and just for whatever reason, I couldn't get going on it. So what did I do? I started tracking my mileage before I started using Mile IQ on a spreadsheet. And I was like, man, this tells me that there's something going on today is just not a good writing day for me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm picking this task, which was one of my least favorite tasks, then today's just not the day I'm going to write. So I got to find a way to make up for it later in the week or over the weekend or tonight or whatever, when maybe I'm more in that mood or more in that vein. Because if I'm doing this task that I really, really don't like, that tells me that my brain is just not in the right spot to do the work that I probably need to be doing that has way higher value. And yet somehow it scares me today. I'm not in the mood, whatever that is. I'm not feeling creative, whatever that is.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest lessons I learned from my sales coach way back before I ever did any of these things was the concept of avoidance and reluctance, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And whenever I was writing my book, my wife is my editor, and so I finished the thing, the rough draft of it, and we're working through it and everything, and then she comes up with a polished version, and she goes, "Okay, I need you to read this." And after years of journaling and trying to be very reflective and owning, my avoidance triggers and, things that come easily and some things are just tough. I read 3 other sales books that had been on my shelves for years, but now it felt super important, and it's just weird how you can even be familiar with the concept and not really even recognize that you're being avoidant of the situation. Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art, right, is I wish I'd read that back when I was still writing, like, and trying to work on my first book, because it talks a lot about the resistance, right? And, the difference between a professional and a hobbyist and everything. And I was reading that book, just a couple of years ago after I'd put out my book, and I was like, well, where was this? It was there. I just didn't go looking for it, kind of thing. I thought it was going to be fine and I wasn't going to have any issues. And, but like 3 other books, and she had to call me out. She was like, hey, when are you going to read this? We have a goal. We're trying to get this out. And I was like, I'm going to get to it, and then I just realized I was hiding, for, largely unfounded reasons, and so I had to kind of have a conversation with myself and bring myself back to the path and, get it all done and everything. Um,
Well, there's
let's talk
fear
a
in
little,
vulnerability. There's fear in imposter syndrome. There's
oh
fear in I'm
yeah.
not good enough.
Mm,
And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to struggle with that. I'll tell you right now, everybody struggles with
yes.
that.
Yeah.
But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to find mental ways or physical ways, or you've got to find ways to get around that, because
Hmm.
everybody struggles with it. And it can be absolutely incapacitating if you let it control you, if you let it own you.
Yeah.
And this is where having a strong entrepreneurial mindset can really help, because it's like, no, I can do this. I am the person to bring this thing to market. I
Yeah.
am the uniquely trained. I have the unique experience. I have the unique vision. You have to just constantly remind yourself in that sort of self-talk cheerleader kind of way. But then
Hmm.
you also do need to hear it from others sometimes,
Yeah,
Your wife
for
was
sure.
probably encouraging to you at the same time. She was loving. Maybe it felt harsh or firm at some point. But you do need that from other people as well to just kind of keep you going, because
Yeah.
it's too easy to just fall in the trap of like, oh, I can't do it, or that setback's going to kill the business. And sometimes that does happen. But uh, the one thing I would say too about most successful entrepreneurs is they just persist. They just persevere. They won't go away. They won't give up the dream. They just keep going.
Yeah.
It's kind of like riding a bike. If you stop pedaling, you fall off. So you just got to keep pedaling. And even if you're not going in the right direction, even if you're not pedaling fast, once you stop pedaling, you're going to fall off. So just keep going, just keep pedaling.
Yeah. Uh, I, I've actually written about that concept of just keep pedaling, right? Like just don't overthink the whole thing. Just stay in motion, right? Been very helpful to me on my path here, right? Because I'll, it's easy for me to start thinking about the big, huge thing, right? And I'm not where I want to be, and how are we going to get there? And I can push myself into some, not helpful mindsets, But if I can just thinking about, okay, what is next, and what is next, and how does that relate to the whole, I can be pretty consistent and stay in motion. Talking specifically about the book thing, right? Because, you come from, presenting and messaging and marketing and things like this. What has been the biggest challenge for you around the book so far?
Well, I'm not even sure I really mentioned the book.
Mm,
So not only have I led 1 Million Cups in Fort Worth for a long, long time, since the summer of or fall of 2013,
mm-hmm,
I was also the co-founder in Kansas City when it very first began, and we kind of hatched this initial idea. And I'll keep a super long story short, but it seemed to me over the summer, after visiting the Kauffman Foundation and interacting with other volunteer organizers from around the country, that the origin story of 1 Million Cups had largely been lost.
mm,
And I thought it was a story that really needed to be told. I shouldn't be surprised by that, because there's plenty of volunteer organizers across the country who work on it all the time, and they come and go because it's a volunteer gig. But I thought it was very important that 1 Million Cups origin story be told for a whole lot of reasons. And so, yes, I am writing a book that's going to talk about the origin story of 1 Million Cups. It's going to share some stories from people whose lives have absolutely been changed by the program, by their ability to present and get feedback from a live studio audience. And I also think there's some interesting takeaways about what it takes to build a movement that we
mm-hmm,
learned in entrepreneurship. Because one way to read the fact that 1 Million Cups even still exists, which I'm the most surprised person that it even still exists, and has survived a global pandemic and multiple leadership changes at the Kauffman Foundation and in volunteers that come and go. The fact that it's still going so strong just tells you that we really hit on something. And
yeah,
what did we learn along the way that you can take to build a movement out of anything. If you want to build a movement about cycling, because we were just talking about pedaling, great. What did we learn from 1 Million Cups about how you can build the cycling community and build a movement around that in your community? Or maybe it's politics or it's religion or whatever it is you want to build a movement on. It doesn't really matter. Some of these lessons I felt like were very core to what we did. Some of it was luck, some of it was skill, some of it was stuff that we learned over time. But the fact that it's had such staying power, and in 2027, which is hopefully when the book will come out, 1 Million Cups will celebrate its 15-year anniversary. What can we do to share what worked for us that might help you in whatever it is that you're working on?
That is awesome. Very, very, very cool. Have you had any unique struggles? Anything that you didn't think was going to be a problem that ended up putting you behind, waylaying your progress? Anything else like that? Any avoidance? Anything like that?
Lots of avoidance, yes. I love the Mary Poppins quote, "Well begun is half done." Some days it's just about me starting. Like I have to get in that frame of mind where I'm not worried about the dishes in the sink or that the mailman just showed up. I just got to start writing.
Yeah.
The other thing too that has been an interesting surprise to me is that I hadn't really anticipated playing historian, which is to say that like I know a lot of what happened, but there are lots of details and other people's perspectives that I hadn't really considered. And so as I'm going down, I'm interviewing a lot of people along the way, and we're recording it almost like a podcast for some sort of future marketing use that I don't even know what we're going to do with it yet. But I need their words, I need their perspective to finish the book. And it's just fascinating the way that people talk about it, the insights that they've gleaned from it, both currently and just over time as they've watched it. The way different people remember different events. Wait, did you drive to Des Moines that day when Des Moines, Iowa launched? No, that wasn't me. I was in Denver. Oh, well, who went to Denver? It's been a decade plus since a lot of these things happened.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to kind of reconstruct it as a historian, which has been kind of fun, but it was not a challenge I was expecting and anticipating. And, I got a lot of work to do to kind of come up with the best, most organized version of the story, but is also still authentic and true to the story. But if you tell every last detail, it'd be a super boring book. If you don't organize it correctly, then it's going to maybe feel like it's not authentic or, like relying or something. And that's not what I want to do either. So it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act on what to include and how to tell the story. But I also get excited about that too, because I think it's a really cool story to tell.
Absolutely. For sure. Changing gears just a little bit, Cam, when you think about, community, innovation, finding your people and everything else like this, right? What advice would you give to someone who's starting today, right? When they're thinking about that?
Find your tribe. Find whatever tribe it is that you're looking for. Make sure that you have a network. And even if it's just your mom and your neighbor or your high school buddies or whoever, you have a network. But you really need to start leveraging that network to connect into other networks. And this is where I think 1 Million Cups can be so important. And it's not about networking in this traditional sense of I'm going to meet somebody, I'm going to give them a business card, and I'm never going to talk to them again. It's not even networking. What we call it at 1 Million Cups is connecting. You need to find connections to other people that can really help you with whatever it is that you need to help you. And the only way to do that is to get out and press the flesh and kiss the babies and talk to people and ask questions, show up at events. I don't care how big or small your community is. There's something going on for entrepreneurs. 1 Million Cups is a great place to start. It's kind of the top of the funnel. But if your city or community doesn't have something, there's other ways you can connect. Through your local university, through your local incubator or co-working space. There's other people that do events all the time. So make sure that you're plugging into that network, and don't be afraid to ask tough questions, right? Like, hey, how did you track your mileage? Hey, how did you make the decision about either raising investment or not raising investment? I have always found that people are very willing to help you, especially if you're just open and honest with them. The next thing I would say too, you may have some students listening. If you're a student, people will help you. And you think, oh, I'm a student, I can't start a company. That is absolutely wrong, because you have the one gift as a student that a lot of us don't have, particularly as you get a little bit older and you take on additional responsibilities. You have the gift of time. You may not have capital, you may not have money, but you have time. And when you're a student, people are probably 10 times more likely to meet you for coffee or give you advice. But the day you graduate, the day you don't become a student anymore, it's just like that moniker lifts and people just aren't as willing to help. And
Yeah.
particularly if there's an alumni network or something, our local university is TCU. If you went to TCU and you can find the right person that's an investor from TCU or a potential customer who went to TCU, my goodness, if you're a TCU student, you're going to have a way better chance of getting that meeting than I would or somebody else would.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So don't hesitate to start something just because you're a student. Another important point here is it is cheaper and faster and easier to start a company now than it ever has been in the history of the world. Take advantage of that because anybody can start just about anything with a few clicks of a mouse or a trackpad and a little bit of, a credit card, right? That's all you really need to get started anymore.
Yeah.
It's very different than most of the rest of how history has worked.
Interesting. Okay. When you talk about finding your tribe, how important is it to find that tribe that's going to share openly, right? Like some communities are just like flex fests, right? And like, look how great we are and look what we did and everything else like this, right? And you can go into there, play bad comparison games, comparison is the thief of joy is a line that I really enjoy and everything. How important is it to like seek out, transparency, vulnerability, and then also be able to cultivate that in yourself?
Well, starting a company is really, really hard and it requires a ton of vulnerability, right? And I think admitting one thing we always used to say, Trey Bowles, who used to run the Techstars Accelerator here in Fort Worth that I worked very closely with and helped establish, he would always say, entrepreneurs don't know what they don't know.
Mm,
And that's an extremely difficult thing to think about because there is a lot of stuff that you don't know. You don't
yeah,
know if your idea is going to work. You don't know if people are going to buy it. You don't know if the stock market is going to crash tomorrow and everything's going to go up in flames. We just don't know, right? Is there
yeah,
another September 11th or another pandemic around the bend? We don't know. You have to kind of control what you can control. And
yeah,
a lot of times that's not very much, particularly in a startup. But
hmm,
how do you fill in those gaps of what you do know and you can know? Another super nerdy way to say it is there was a Donald Rumsfeld quote. Remember Donald Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense for
yeah,
Bush and longtime public servant? He gives this amazing thing about there's the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and the known knowns. And it's just like it makes zero sense when he says it. But if you really think about it, it's like there are things you can know that you don't know. There are some things
yeah,
that you know. There are some things that you don't know, but you could probably figure out. And so it's like, how do you kind of figure out what those buckets are? And it might be as helpful as just drawing on a sheet of paper. Like, here's what I know I know. Here's what
hmm,
I don't know that I'm never going to figure out, right? Because I don't know if a pandemic's coming next week.
yeah.
And just kind of go through some of those thought exercises.
I love that.
The other thing I would say too is fall in love with the problem and not the solution. Too
Oh,
many times we rush to the solution. And you got to make sure you really understand the problem. Ask a bunch of people, would they actually buy it? Would
yeah,
they actually pay you for this service? This is something I've struggled with because I sort of know this in my heart of hearts, and I've had a really hard time doing that. Just having the discipline to do it
hmm,
and spending the time on it like I probably should. What are those real problems
yeah,
that I should be out there solving? Too often people jump right to the solution, and that is spend plenty of time in the problem and make sure you really understand it because it's probably not where you initially think that it is. It's
yeah.
probably a little bit somewhere else, and that can lead you down to some that can save you a lot of steps in the long run if you make sure you understand the problem.
I thank you for touching on that, right? Because I will talk to people and they'll miss that gap, right? They'll be
It's easy to
focused
do.
on I'm going to build a lookalike, but it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be better, or we're just going to disrupt this space, right? And they're almost like alone in their like ivory tower, right? They're not talking to anybody. And then what happens is they inevitably struggle, and like I'm always the last guy to call whenever it's those kinds of people, right? And so then they'll reach out and like, okay, John, I've tried everything. I now need like help selling this thing, and they're still thinking that the job of it is to like force people over this barrier and over this hurdle to get them to buy. And it's like, well, let's go back and talk to the people and figure out exactly like what were they hoping for? What do they see the problem as? What are the symptoms that like lead people to awareness of this problem? Like it's so easy to jump over all that stuff, you know, and like we're just sometimes too smart for our own good. So thank you very much for talking about that.
Yeah, there's a great book on this subject called The Mom Test. And it's
Mm,
this idea that, like, okay, your mom's always going to buy your product, but your mom is not your ideal customer, right? She loves you because she's
yep.
your mom, and she's going
Hmm.
to, whether you're selling lemonade in the front yard or you're building a high growth tech company, it doesn't matter. Your
Yeah.
mom's always going to love what you do.
Oh yeah.
But a piece of this is also, this notion that you have to validate your assumptions.
Yes.
I assume that people are going to buy this product because, yeah, but why do I assume that? You got to get out there and validate. You got to get out of the room, right? You got to get out of your own world. You got to get out of your comfort zone and talk to real people with real money
Yeah.
that would, they're looking at, do I want to buy lunch or do I want to buy your product? And it's sometimes just that simple. And you got to make sure that they're going to put that $20 or $100 or $1,000 into what you're selling
Yep.
versus whatever it is they want to spend their money on elsewhere. Because we all got plenty of choices of where we can spend our money.
Absolutely. One of my favorite books on this is obviously Awesome by April Dunholm, you know, and she talks about how the minute you decide that it's a CRM, you're starting to put walls around what
Yep.
it could be, right? As opposed to just going out and being like, hey, you know, what's the hard part with growing sales and growing revenue and growing your company? You know, you might end up on a very different path, which is might make it so much easier to sell, you know. Now that you are a founder, right? After being around so many founders and entrepreneurs on your path and everything, what is the struggle or the thing or the lesson that you can now appreciate that you didn't really have the room to appreciate when you were just like hearing it from other people? What comes to mind for you?
Um, I think it is. I think it's just the uncertainty. Is this going
Mm,
to work? How long is it going to take? How much perseverance and blood, sweat, and tears am I willing to put into this thing before I just go, spend my time being an Uber driver or take a job,
yeah.
and those are difficult decisions. And I'm married. I have 3 kids. It's not a decision that I just get to make alone because I have a mortgage and
Yeah.
I have other costs I have to pay for. And I wouldn't change that in a heartbeat because I love my family, but there are some decisions that I have to make. And, you can try and try and try, and it may not work, and you may run out of time. And I
Mhm.
think that I'll quote Trey Bowles again here. He says, the biggest enemy of any startup is time. And I have
Oof.
really felt that, which is, I know I can do this. I know this will work. It's just going to take me a while to figure out the right mix of clients.
Mhm.
You're going to have to, shoot 10 baskets so you can make 2 of them, that sort of thing. But if those are the 2 right baskets that pay me and are good work and things like that, then it's totally worth it. It's okay that I missed on 8 shots as long
Mhm.
as I make the 2.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is like, I know I can make this work if given enough time, but how much time do I actually have before I have to kind of pivot and change
Oh
or
yeah.
take my life in a different direction? And that's been a really interesting internal discussion and frankly a struggle of mine is like, how much time do I actually give this thing before I'm just feeding the beast that's never going to turn into anything or whatever the
Oh
right
yeah.
analogy is there.
Right. Like, I mean, identity, right? If you
Yeah.
wrap yourself up in this identity being a founder, right? And then all of a sudden it's not working and you might just be, you know, creating a blind spot around all of these signals that are indicating that it's not working out because you know, it's super easy to sell yourself on, well, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to figure this out. We just got to keep hammering at it, you know, and stuff like that. And that's where it's like the concept of like, this is an experiment is really, really, really important because an experiment has an end date, right? And there's certain goals that indicate that this is a successful experiment versus one that like we shouldn't continue. So, you know, I love that. Last question, Cameron, and then I can let you get on with your day. And thank you so much for coming on. You know, you've been in the space for a very long time, and obviously the world has changed since, you know, you started, you know, being a volunteer for 1 million cups and everything. And now with AI and everything that is changing and stuff, other than go find your tribe, because we already talked about that, what is your piece of advice for someone who is like starting today?
Yeah, I'll go back to this like reluctance that people have to share what it is that they're working on. I think another
Hmm.
myth we have taken from the Silicon Valley culture and the Facebook culture, we've all seen those movies, the Steve Jobs movie and the social network and things like that, is that I can't tell you what I'm working on. It's too secretive and
Hmm.
you're going to steal it and you're going to run with it. Now, there
Yeah.
are some cases, and I want to be very careful how I say this. There are some cases where you have to be extremely careful and you do need to sign an NDA and things like that. But probably 9.9 out of 10 times, you're in a position where You can talk about, you should share what you're working on, and you need to find ways to talk about what you're working on that doesn't deliver anything proprietary, that doesn't get you into trouble, that doesn't reveal the secret sauce, right?
Yeah,
We know all about Coca-Cola, but nobody actually knows the secret recipe, right? So,
absolutely.
man, Coca-Cola talks about themselves all the time. They market it, they get people to drink it, they do all kinds of crazy things, but like there's only a handful of people in the entire world that know the secret recipe that's locked up in the safe. Don't give me the code to the safe, right? Lock it away. I don't need to know that.
Hmm.
But there's this hesitancy both of the entrepreneurs and of the community that if we don't know what you're working on, then we won't know how to help you.
Absolutely.
Conversely, if you won't share what you're working on, then there is no way that the community can help you.
Yeah,
And I'm a huge believer that the more you share with the community, the more the community can come in and fix whatever problem it is that you're working on. It's the core, it's one of the core beliefs behind 1 Million Cups. And I
absolutely.
also say this too to elected officials, local leaders, economic development folks, corporate leaders. If you don't know who the local entrepreneurs that are operating in your own community, you won't know how to help them. And
Mm,
I think it's an imperative that we have these new businesses that are constantly getting started, trying new things, trying to bring new innovation to market, trying to create jobs, trying to build wealth for our society. And if we as a community don't embrace them and give them a whole big hug for what they're doing, then I think we're failing them as a community, and we're leaving a whole lot of economic growth and job creation at the doorstep that is already going on pretty naturally. We just don't embrace it as a community and as a society. So if you don't know who the entrepreneurs are, you don't know how to help them. And if you're the entrepreneur and you're not willing to share what you're working on, even at a basic level, then
hmm.
I think you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Well said, my friend. Like, it's super easy to feel uncomfortable about it, but it's not going to get better if you don't try. And if you're not, when I'm working with certain people, I'm like, hey, you just got to talk loudly about the things that you're working on, right? You don't have to go on some over polished version of it or anything else like that, but like talk about what you're working on, and I love all the examples of people working in public on social media and, and stuff like that, because, when you can just broadcast early, you can have some people that are ready for it whenever it gets closer to it. And that can be a game changer. Can we quickly, just real quick, talk about your podcast real quick? Because I think that might also help some people, right? Can you talk about where that is and how that is structured so that way anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about you can find their way over to your stuff?
Absolutely. Well, it's all built from all this stuff that we've talked about, which is if the community doesn't know what you're working on, they don't know how to help you. And so
Hmm.
all we're doing is just telling stories of people in the community who are innovating and doing really cool stuff. It is sponsored by the Texas A&M Fort Worth folks. A specific division of theirs called the Fort Worth Tarrant County Innovation Partnership. It's real simple. It's just called Fort Worth Innovates. Just search it. It's on YouTube. It's wherever you get your podcasts. And all we do is interview local innovators. And that can be everybody from entrepreneurs to researchers to people that are just doing interesting things in the community. Even we've had a couple of political leaders on. And we have an episode that comes out every other Tuesday. And if you really want to learn about stuff that's going on in your community that doesn't make the news typically, because a lot of these are really early, they're early stage
Hmm.
technologies, or it's like one guy and he's got a cool idea. That's a great place to do it. And we've had some real success in a very similar but previous podcast of we put a podcast episode out and then a couple of weeks later the media picks them up and then
Mm,
they get the story written about them, or they find that one thing that they were looking for, they found that co-founder, or maybe they sign that term sheet, they get that investment.
hmm.
If you don't tell your story in a broad way, and if we as a community aren't telling those stories, then those connections don't happen, those interactions don't happen. And I just think it's imperative for us as a community to understand who these people are, what they're working on, and again, you learn something. I'm just
Hmm.
fascinated by the cool stuff that's going on right in our own city, and it goes on in all cities across the country that most people just don't know about. Mostly because they don't tune in.
Yeah.
And you can listen to a podcast while you're driving. People watch YouTube all the time. Just put
Hmm.
on something like Fort Worth Innovates, and you're gonna learn something that's gonna better yourself as a community member. And maybe you have the secret sauce. Maybe you can help that company without even knowing it. But you won't know if you don't tune in.
Awesome. Cam, Can't thank you enough for coming on here, man. Such a cool conversation, and I think we uncovered a lot for people, right? People who are already in progress and might be struggling, people who were kind of under the weight of like the bad ideas of like what entrepreneurship really is and what it looks like to start a business. And I think this is really going to help a lot of people, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing so openly.
Well, thanks for having me. As you can't probably tell, I'm kind of passionate about this stuff, and I really do believe that this is an imperative for the future of our country, particularly when it comes to economic development and innovation. This is where almost all net new jobs come from, is new companies, and so if we want to continue growing our economy as a city, as a county, as a state, as a country, this is super important, and we don't talk about it enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.